After nearly 2 months of bloody warfare that left thousands dead, Hamas was doing a victory dance yesterday, claiming credit for the ceasefire in Gaza, while in reality, the Islamic terrorists suffered their biggest defeat ever.
Is the ceasefire just a temporary calm before another storm? Hamas says it won't stop its battle against Israel and is getting ready to take the holy city of Jerusalem. Chris Mitchell brings us that story.
After the ceasefire announcement, Hamas organized a celebration in Gaza City. Women threw candy, men waved flags, and Hamas spokesman declared victory.
We are here today after achieving an agreement between the two sides to announce the victory of resistance. We are here today to announce the victory of Gaza.
In Israel, experts said Hamas had sustained its worst blow ever and would brag no matter what. Many Israelis sounded relieved but leery.
I'm very, very happy that it happens, but I'm very doubtful about the effectiveness of this ceasefire, because it could be that this is the 14th ceasefire that we are getting in.
The Egyptian brokered agreement stipulates no more rocket fire from Gaza, the opening of the Rafah crossing with Egypt, and expanding fishing rights off the Gaza coast. In approximately 1 month, negotiations will begin on building a seaport and airport in Gaza and the release of Hamas prisoners.
This time, we hope the ceasefire will stick, and I think now that the dust will be clearing, many people will be asking, why is it that Hamas has today accepted the very same framework that they rejected a month ago? So much bloodshed could have been avoided.
Despite the loss of so much life, Hamas sounded defiant and ready for the next round of fighting. A Hamas spokesman said, "The value of this campaign is not in the opening of this crossing or that crossing, but in paving the way for the next phase of liberating Jerusalem and the land of Palestine. Today, we are closer to Jerusalem."
Well, Chris Mitchell is with us now from Jerusalem. Chris, how can Hamas claim victory after suffering such losses?
Well, Pat, you know, they're driven by ideology, not necessarily by reality. More than 2,200 Palestinians have died. Their rocket inventory went from an estimated 10,000 down to 2,000. 5,000 buildings have been destroyed. Much of their leadership has been destroyed. I think about 1,000 of their fighters have been killed. But what they can say is they can live to fight another day. And destroying the Jewish state, killing Jews, is all part of their charter. And as a former Israeli ambassador told me today, they're not looking for a Palestinian state beside Israel. They're looking for an Islamist state, just like ISIS is.
Chris, you know, Netanyahu said he wasn't going to stop until they sort of took away the threat of Hamas. Are they coming up short, or have they accomplished certain goals?
Well, they did accomplish certain goals. They really have devastated Hamas in many ways, but I think you could sum up the reaction of not only some of the ministers in the government, but also the Israeli public. There's a headline in one of Israel's major newspapers that says, "Southern communities are outraged. We cave to a terror organization." So I think there's a mixed reaction in Israelis. They are relieved that the war is over, but I think many feel like they missed an opportunity. Uzi Landau, one of the ministers in the government, he's the minister of tourism, said the government, he criticized them for wanting peace at any price. And it really has hurt Netanyahu in the polls. When the ground incursion went in more than a month ago, his popularity was over 80%. Now it's less than 40%. So he's dropped 40% in the polls. And I think other was telling that this ceasefire was not even brought up for a vote in the Security Cabinet.
Well, Hamas is saying on to Jerusalem. This is only an interim agreement. We're going to Jerusalem. I mean, what's Israel going to do?
Well, that's one of the things, one of the goals, not only of Hamas, but all the Islamist groups in the region, including ISIS. That's their goal, is to come here to Jerusalem and defeat what they call the little Satan, Israel. But just one stepping stone on the way to the big Satan, the great Satan, which is the United States and the West. You know, Pat, there is some news just today that Nusra, which is one of these Islamic groups, has taken over Quneitra on the Golan Heights. And I think this is a very, very serious development, because what one IDF officer has said is ISIS is actually getting closer and closer to the Israeli border on the Golan. And he said there's 50 shades of black on the other side of the border. And we just got off the phone just a few minutes ago with one of Israel's former national security advisors, and he said that Israel is on the front lines of all these Islamic movements, and it might be they'll be the front lines. The West is next, and he says it's really the Jews that often are the first target, and then comes the rest of the world.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate your coverage. Stay with it, my friend. God bless you.
Yes. Thank you.
Well, in other news, some Americans have been joining the ISIS terrorists in their jihad in Syria, and now it looks like one of them has been killed. John Jessup has that story from our CBN News Bureau in Washington. Here's John.
Pat, U.S. officials believe Douglas MacArthur McCain was fighting with ISIS after being recruited to join the terrorists on the battlefield. But they're still waiting to retrieve his body and verify information about his death. The news comes as President Obama is considering American military options in Syria. Heather Sells has that story.
McCain is one of 2 Americans reportedly killed in Syria this week while fighting for the terror group the Islamic State, also known as ISIS. The 33-year-old grew up in Minnesota and went to college in San Diego. One cousin said he had lost his way.
I felt like he may have lost his identity because all of this is not him.
It's believed that jihadist groups in Syria, including ISIS, have recruited some 100 Americans to fight. Back in May, another American fighting for a rival rebel group to ISIS blew himself up in a suicide attack. He left behind this threatening message.
You think you are safe, you are not safe.
ISIS has dominated the headlines, especially in the last week, after killing American journalist James Foley and holding another American hostage, a female humanitarian worker in Syria. The White House is responding with renewed pressure. The president issued this warning on Tuesday.
But our message to anyone who harms our people is simple. America does not forget. Our reach is long. We are patient. Justice will be done.
The president has also authorized surveillance flights in Syria.
This is a serious threat from a serious group of terrorists, and we need to stay mindful of doing what we need to do to protect American citizens at home and abroad.
Earlier this month, the U.S. began launching airstrikes against ISIS in Iraq. The Pentagon is now preparing for the possibility of airstrikes against ISIS in Syria. The president has long resisted taking military action there, but with the growing ISIS threat, it appears that new options are now on the table. Heather Sells, CBN News.
Here at home, still another revelation in the IRS Tea Party targeting scandal. An IRS filing in federal court shows the agency destroyed former IRS official Lois Lerner's BlackBerry, which contained emails congressional investigators wanted. And it was destroyed after their investigation had started. The BlackBerry's emails were the same ones the IRS says were lost when Lerner's computer crashed. The IRS also says there's no record of any attempt to recover the information from the BlackBerry before it was destroyed. Pat?
You know, there was a very prominent hedge fund manager who said to his staff, clean up the files. And what did that mean? Well, it could have meant you've got too much junk around and why don't you, organize it somewhat. But on the strength of that, he was convicted of obstruction of justice. And if once a legal action begins, an attempt to destroy information from that moment on becomes obstruction of justice. It's a federal crime. And the IRS is breaking crimes. They're out of control. And there's a massive cover-up, but it seems to be nobody is going to pay much attention to it. There is a judge who is disgusted with what's going on, and I think he's going to put down some pretty severe penalties. But Congress has been stonewalled by these people, and they're doing what would never be allowed by a private citizen. You try to destroy your records when the IRS is investigating you, and watch what happens. You go to prison. It's just that simple. I wish it weren't all that simple, but it is. And yet this government agency is flouting the law, and Lois Lerner says, well, I'm taking the Fifth Amendment, and then they've lost her records, and then they've suddenly miraculously found them again. Then there was a BlackBerry that had some of them backed up too, but somehow or other, after the investigation started, it was destroyed, and the IRS is saying, oh, well, look, we're innocent. They're the ones going to be in charge of enforcing Obamacare, ladies and gentlemen. You can't trust them. John?
Pat, a historic record on Wall Street. The Standard & Poor's 500 stock index closed above 2,000 for the first time ever Tuesday, but just barely by 0.02 of a point. The S&P closed at 2,000.02, with the Dow also at a record high. While most people watch the Dow, professional investors focus on the S&P 500, which includes far more stocks. Many experts believe the bull market will continue and that the Dow will hit 20,000 in the next few years. Pat?
Good grief. I don't see how it's possible, but our resident guru has told me today that he thinks it might well go up to 2,000. What's driving it? Corporate profits. Corporations are making a huge amount of money, and they're sidestepping some of the garbage that goes on in Washington, and they're doing their business despite Obama. And the economy is chugging along. This is a great economy. If it's like Gulliver and the Lilliputians, if we took the fetters off of this economy and let it soar, we'd take off and be the wonder of the world. But Obama and his crew are doing everything they can to cripple our industry, and yet the industry continues to move forward. But I think the stock market has been fueled by excessive funding by the Federal Reserve Board, and the Fed is starting to ease up on that QE2 stuff they were doing. And it seems like to me it can't be too much longer before, when the punch bowl is taken away, the party stops. John?
Pat, the Obama administration is working on a major international climate change agreement, and it appears the president will try to bypass Congress, even though the Senate is supposed to ratify international treaties. The New York Times reports the White House is trying to forge the sweeping agreement that would force nations to cut their fossil fuel emissions in an attempt to fight what they believe is man-made global warming. But the move is likely to anger Republicans in Congress, who have been saying the president has been abusing his authority by bypassing Congress. And Pat, that Times article also pointed out this is much like the president's domestic strategy when he bypassed Congress with new regulations on coal.
Well, he gets away with it, and as long as we let him get away with it, there's no way in the world Congress can impeach Obama. And all that talk about impeachment is merely a Democratic ruse to raise money for their election plans. But something has got to hold him back, but nothing seems to. But he's just running roughshod over the Constitution. You can't have a treaty that is binding without a 2/3 vote of the United States Senate to ratify it. And if you don't have it, you're not going to get it ratified. So what are they doing? Well, they're slipping in an amendment to a previously approved treaty, and they're saying, well, this is just an amendment to that. It's a game, but it's not binding. But we're going to get stuck with it, and the, airy-fairy types who live in this environment about climate change are going to impose their views on American industry, and they're going to cripple coal, they're going to cripple major manufacturing, they're going to do everything they can to close us down because they really don't like America to be strong. That's the bottom line. But unless China, unless India, unless some of the other major polluters come along, then what we do will be as nothing, because the major polluter is China. And if China doesn't buy into this deal, then our efforts will be in vain. And yet our Constitution is still there, and you hope it's not shredded too much before Barry gets replaced by someone else.
The African Islamic terrorist group Boko Haram has declared its own Islamic caliphate in northern Nigeria. It's also claiming control of another town. Boko Haram says it now operates the city of Gwoza in Borno State, saying Allah is going to use Islam to rule Nigeria and the whole world. But the National Army denied the terrorist claim, stating that the Nigerian state is still intact. In April, Boko Haram militants kidnapped more than 200 schoolgirls, most of whom still remain captive. More than 4,000 people have been killed this year in Boko Haram's jihad in Nigeria. Well, here at home, Louisiana Governor Bobby Jindal plans to file a lawsuit against the Obama administration over the Common Core federal education standards. Jindal is accusing the administration of illegally using federal grant money to force states to approve the standards. The Department of Education has used $4.3 billion in programs and policy waivers to encourage states to adopt Common Core. Well, you can always get the latest from CBN News by going to our website at cbnnews.com.